Now, you guys know I have a problem with Raw Story because they have this weird, like, atheist chip on their shoulder that they just need to shit on religious people nonstop. It's kind of a dick move. They do it constantly. And they do it kind of intentionally cruelly, you know? Um, and I've called them out on it and gotten into little minor, Twitter feuds with some of the writers about it in the past. But the same thing is true with the manipulation of, trying to scare you through motivation. The fear is that on their part, is that if they can't make you afraid, if they can't make you petrified, you won't be motivated. So, yes, real religious people can take it. Indeed. I mean, it's just an obvious issue that they have. I call them out more for that blind spot on their own bias. Yeah. But, and they're not just talking about evangelicals at all. I mean, they literally are, it borders on Ayn Randian. Ayn Rand believed that anyone who wasn't an atheist was, in her words, mentally retarded. This was her phrase. And Raw Story, as lefty and progressive as they allege to be, are as Ayn Randian about spiritual belief as anyone. Brian says, "Is there a casting couch?" No, there is not. So if there was in 1982 or earlier, I couldn't tell you. But don't get me wrong, I had a male casting director make obvious passes at me and some of my male friends when I was in high school in Chicago. He's dead now. Not by anything we did, allegedly. But that existed, but it didn't change the nature of, I mean, I never got cast in any of those things, so maybe there was one. Anyways, we've talked about that before. So this story, what voter suppression looks like. Rejected ballot requests up 400% after new Georgia voting law. Dear God. Igor at Salon is right. 400%. What a shocking and horrible. 400% this year from last year. Now, I know what you're thinking. Was there an election this year? Yeah, there was a municipal election. Now, is the same number of humans out of 1,000 a larger percentage than the same number of humans out of 400? Yeah. It is. So when you have less people voting in an election and you have the same exact number of people who have rejected ballots in general, the percentage number will be way higher when fewer people vote. When you have a lot more people voting, the number gets way smaller. This is also how we explained, the whole. This is the opposite version of what Giuliani and Mike Lindell and all those people are talking about when they're like, the rejection by signature was down to 2%. Well, that's because the number of people who voted by mail was way fucking up, and the same number of people with shaky handwriting tried to fill out their, absentee ballot applications and got their signatures thrown out. Same number of fucking people. 1-to-1, human beings, same number. Larger number of people want absentee ballots. The number of people who get rejected is going to be a smaller percentage of that larger number, right? In a normal year, that number is very small, and so therefore a larger percentage is rejected because of that very reason. This is exactly why we call bullshit on what Giuliani said in Michigan, what he said in Pennsylvania, what Lindell has talked about in all these fucking states. And so the exact same thing has to be true if we're going to be consistent about bullshit stories like this about the Georgia law. Now, I know what you're thinking. How? Have you read SB 202, the Georgia voting law? Yes. I still have like 4 pages left in it, but I'm almost all the way through it. And most of the stuff that at the tail end is stuff that I've already read that it's sort of descriptives about, but I'm going through the actual bill itself. Hold on one second, I'll show you something. As I was going through the bill, as I was talking about it, I was reviewing it to be read. This would be, I'm using the New York Times text of the bill to do that. I was grabbing screenshots as I went along of certain parts of it that stood out to me as concerning, and certain parts of it that I saw a lot of people making really egregious, pearl clutching claims about that are really kind of bullshit. So, one of the ones was, okay, so here's one of the ones that I found concerning. I'll send this picture to my own, there you go, open this guy. This little piece right here, this worried me. Hi, Brian Kemp, excuse your face. This is one of the things that at first blush was like, shit, this could be a real problem. Any elector of a county or municipality, meaning the person who, the voter, voters are called electors in this particular situation, may challenge the qualifications of any person applying to register to vote, the qualifications of any person applying to register to vote in the county or municipality, and so it has to be 1-to-1. You can't challenge across the county in this part of it anyways, and may challenge the qualifications of any elector of the county or municipality whose name appears on the list of electors, so that's across county lines. Such challenges shall be in writing and shall specify distinctly the grounds of the challenge. That's always been the law. Okay? That didn't change at all. What changed was the underlying part. There shall not be a limit on the number of persons whose qualifications such elector may challenge. So somebody in the state of Georgia could effectively, if they wanted to be a complete asshole, challenge the voting rights of everybody. They have to do it one at a time. They'd have to fill out a specific piece of paper for every voter that they wanted to kick off, but they could go through this. They could do this. This applies to anybody, though. So a group of Democratic voters could sit all day between now and, I would guess starting in February of next year, all the way up to like August, and just file piles and piles and piles of paperwork challenging every voter in rural Georgia on the grounds that they don't believe that person is there. How ignores the smart GOP or Elise Stefanik? What makes her smart? We've talked about Elise Stefanik in the past. And I don't know that I've ever been impressed by some of her reasoning. Okay. The next part of it comes, though. Here we go. Throw this in here real quick, and it'll come back up. The same thing. This was the next piece I grabbed from the page, which will be, here we go. The burden shall be on the elector making the challenge to prove that the person being challenged is not qualified to remain on the list of electors. So it defaults to the person who filed. They have to prove that that person is not qualified to vote. So while the first part of that might go, holy shit, these people can just erase people's right to vote. No, they have to, the burden is on the person making the challenge. Now, the Board of Registrars shall have the authority to issue subpoenas for the attendance of witnesses and production of papers, book materials, blah, 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 by the person whose qualifications are being challenged. They could subpoena that information from those folks, like your address or whatever the hell. I don't know what kind of verification that they would, what element of your own personal books would mean that you're not qualified to vote in that regard other than your address and your ID or something like that. The party requesting such subpoenas shall be responsible to serve such subpoenas and, if necessary, to enforce the subpoenas by application to Superior Court. Any witness so subpoenaed and after attending shall be allowed and paid the same mileage and fee as allowed and paid witnesses in civil actions at the Superior Court. So the burden is on the state. If some idiot in part of the state, sues to get your voting rights taken away, and they subpoena your documents for that, the state will pay for the copying of it, and then the state will also pay for the mileage if you have to go into court or whatever. They'll pay for your Uber because they have to. So on the one hand, these idiots are going to do all this awful, and on the other hand, they're just basically creating a mess of litigation in the state of Georgia because the amount of lawsuits. Let's see. I missed something. Legalize doxing, kind of. That's later on in the bill. I have a better chance of being bitten by a shark while being struck by lightning than finding voter fraud. Yes, this is true. Although there was a lovely story about another Trump voter who got busted for voting illegally multiple times. I think at least twice. You might have tried a third time. So here's one of the good parts of this bill. Now, let's see. That's a big part of, there's no limit now to how many people you can challenge. So basically, the idea is that they give the Lynn Woods of the world the ability to just volume, as long as they want to sit there and type up their complaints, they can challenge as many as they want. But the burden is on them to prove that that person is not there and or is not qualified to vote. It's not on the voter. So at a certain point, I don't know how in court you have the right to get this person broomed off without reasonable foreknowledge. And if that person doesn't deserve to vote in the fucking state, I don't care, because they moved. That person's not going to vote there anyways. Which brings me to something that I pointed out when I started going down the list of the stories associated with this. So I was following the stories on this. Let's see. This this kind of started in this process. Let's see if it opens up. Yeah, we got a Republican villager arrested for allegedly casting more than one election ballot. This lady who was posting Trump memes, by the way. So I'm sure she's a Democrat Biden voter, probably a person of color under a mask. Don't let the blue eyes fool you. Let's see. Joan Halstead, 72, of Village of Palo Alto, was arrested at 6:20 p.m. Monday on the Sumter County warrant, charging her with fraud of casting more than one ballot at any election. She was released after she posted $2,000 bond. She's facing 5 years in jail. So in watching that, again, I will make the case that anywhere they look for voter fraud, they're going to find it, but they're going to find Trump voters who tried to vote more than once. And anywhere that they find, any kind of mass voter fraud where somebody was like harvesting ballots, they're going to find all Trump votes. Sorry. Everywhere you look, you're just going to give Biden more votes. That's how it's going to shake down. And as much as they're like, oh, dear God, they're going to go, so the election is secure. Exactly. They if you try to vote twice, they're going to know and they're going to bust you. Get used to the idea. Yeah, 534 charged against 154 people actually prosecuted in the last 17 years. It's pathetically low. Right, exactly. So in this, I started looking further down the stories, and let's see. Okay, here, this is the one that everybody was like, this is where the 400% idea came from. Okay, so kind of important. This is the story where Raw Story got the story, where Salon pulled this stuff. Georgia election officials rejected absentee ballot applications in the state's municipal elections this month at a rate more than 4 times higher than during the 2020 election cycle. Now, what do you want to bet that the voter turnout was 10 times lower or something along those lines in the municipal elections in Georgia than it was the 2020 presidential election, the largest turnout election in our nation's history? What do you think? Right. So, election officials rejected 4%. 4% of absentee ballot applications ahead of the November 2nd elections, up from less than 1% in 2020. Notice how they don't provide you with the number of human beings who actually voted, the pure number of beings, because that's how you would know whether this is something to be worried about or not. And so therefore the omission of those things is why I don't worry about that bullshit. So according to an analysis by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, well, there we go. Most of the absentee ballot applications rejected last year were duplicates of applications that had been already submitted. That's because they were some people had already asked for them, and then they did a statewide where they sent it out to everybody. So they threw out the second one. Some people filled them out because they thought they had to fill out the new one. They just rejected one of them. The person got their ballot from the one they originally filled out. Who gives a fuck? And they voted. All right. Often because voting groups, that's Dem get out the vote groups, or local governments sent out multiple forms to voters. All of those voters voted. So, New Georgia law SB 202 requires absentee ballot applications to be submitted at least 11 days before the election. It used to be 5 days, now it's 11. You have 11 days for absentee ballot applications. That's the by mail part. You can still vote early. That doesn't change. You can still go in, get your ballot, and vote. But if you want it mailed to you and mailed back, it's now 11 days instead of 5. While the previous deadline was the Friday before Election Day, data shows that 52% of the rejected applications were denied because they were submitted too late under the new law. Okay, that means some people didn't know that the timing had changed. That's what that means. Another 15% were rejected because of missing or incorrect ID information under the new law. This is all stuff, it's good to know this stuff now. These are all not people of color, by the way. This is statewide. There's a lot of hicks out there who are don't know the rules as well by volume. There's more of those folks. Do you think Democrats are not going to know this by 2022 and work this out? Please. So here's what now. This is what voter suppression looked like. Charged Senator Michelle Au, a Democrat. Though full voter file data will not be released by the state until next year, 19% of the people who requested an absentee ballot did not submit one before the polls opened on Election Day. 19%. Who requested an absentee ballot did not submit one before the polls opened on Election Day. That you wouldn't even be able to do that under the old 5-day rule. That's 20% of the fucking people we're talking about. Now, how many people are we talking about? How many people? Anybody see anything? Anybody? Anybody see a number? 20% of what? How many by volume? Individuals. Do you see a number there? No, you don't. Is that an accident? No, it is not. This is a panic paper. According to the New Georgia Project Action Fund, a voting rights group, based on 2020 trends, again, this is the same bullshit I call Giuliani and those crowd on, based on 2020 trends, because they based their 2020 predictions on previous trends from like 2016, even though none of those happened during a fucking pandemic. The group estimates that 13% of people who requested an absentee ballot ended up not voting at all this year, nearly double the 2020 rate. %13% of the people who requested an absentee ballot ended up voting not voting at all this year. Nearly double. Yes, that's just true in off-year elections for, like in 2022 it's going to be down from 2020. Duh. At least that amount. Data shows that voter suppression laws work as intended, tweeted former Democratic presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Georgia Republicans passed the law after Joe Biden carried the state last November, and Democrats won the state. This is true. Time-wise, time moves forward. A record 1.3 million Georgia voters cast absentee ballots in the 2020 election, with 2/3 of them voting for President Joe Biden. The absentee ballots were 2/3, so a third of them were for Trump. Third of the, right, okay. 1.3 million, a third of them voted for Trump, 2/3 voted for Biden. Okay. The law also restricts ballot drop boxes. Now, oh dear God, does it? Or does it return it back to the rule that was pre-pandemic? Do you think anybody read what it says? The rule has been put back, and this is, by the way, this is in their thing. And the 11-day election, 11-day deadline, the 11-day election is too far in advance of election day to adequately serve voters. This is who oversees elections in Georgia's Heard County, saying in an affidavit supporting a challenge to the law. So these are the lawsuits that I've told you guys are being filed everywhere. And many of them will go through. But a voter rights advocate group is saying actually that a lot of people that get it later, their ballots aren't received in time, or they wait too long to mail them back in. So they don't, it splits the vote as far as the value of it. Okay. Crucial swing state voted by 12,000 votes. Now every vote counts in this, and believe me, they're trying to chip away as much as possible. But the way it was before, you almost were setting up voters to fail. CEO of National Vote at Home Institute. It's actually a best practice to cut it off so the voters are actually receiving the ballots enough time to get it back. She's the one who's saying that it's actually better to have the date at 11 days beforehand. That if you want people to vote from home, you should have the deadline be before that, because it sets up voters to fail when they get them too late, too close to the date themselves. They get confused about whether they have to walk them in or not, and then they just don't. So, and this is since we know that black voters in Georgia were more likely to request absentee ballots than white voters in 2018, 2020, and January 5th runoff, restrictions to voting by mail clearly impact those voters in disproportionate rate, Conacher said in a statement to Salon. In a crucial swing state, and by the way, while this was true because of their party affiliation in 2020 specifically, the 2018 thing, notice it was in 2016. And 2020 and January 5th both happened during the pandemic. 2018 was an uptick in voters in general. And so you had a volume issue. That more Democrats came out to vote. 2018 was a Democrat-leaning election. So where's the other one? I know I'm boring the shit out of you guys now with this, but let's see. Feature law, election integrity, crime, and thing. Christian for Justice Department, preservation. There's a lot of pushback against this. If Georgia, let's see. If Georgia had still been covered by the pre-clearance requirement, Garland said, it is likely that SB 202 would have never taken effect. This is true because it's gacked up with a bunch of shit that they're going to challenge, and some of it will get thrown out and some of it will stay. And there's a bunch of provisions in the bill that allow for parts of it to be tossed out while keeping the rest of it. That's the trick of SB 202. So let's look at, real quick. And this is just about kind of like what to look towards when you're maybe being led around by the nose and made to just shit your pants with fear every time they tell something. All right. Georgia voting law drives rejections of absentee requests made too late. So this is the one that says that this is the main reason. After the deadline, 708 of those were rejected. 708 were rejected. The count overall, this is how many, this is in percentage, this is the physical number, the actual number. 700 were rejected because they came in after the deadline. That's the majority of them. Democrats in 2022 will know when the date is. Missing ID, 208. Ineligible or incorrect, 119. Invalid form, signatures, yada, yada. These are from the municipals. There's 208 of those, 119, 118, 105, 166, and miscellaneous was 38. Okay, so is it down here? Let's see. Missing or incorrect ID information accounted for 15% of denied ballot requests. Okay, 15% of these, as 208 people were denied because they had missing or incorrect 208 people. 208. 56% of them might be people of color because they came from Atlanta proper. The rest of them are all rural whites. And still, neither one are making a big, taking a big chunk out of us. All right. So I know I'm hammering this point, but I want to show you one last thing that particularly I found telling and very important. Remember how I was saying, and I've talked about this on John's show, about how once Democrats, once the Republicans set a rule, the best thing that Democrats can do is to push for total adherence to those laws so that they are threading that needle as hard as it is and put resources into these swing states that absolutely fine-tune what they need for their voters. Nothing will stop, nothing legally can stop them from doing this. And this is where Democrats are absolutely doing this. This is like Stacey Abrams' win in this circumstance. It is some of the good work that they've been doing down there that they don't get credit for. But I want to show you something about this. Okay, here it is. This was the whole big thing. Voter ID is meant to be a racist bulwark against people of color voting. That said, how many people is that? Now, Democrats have been busting their ass making sure that because this has been a creeping law for a long time, and most people have it. Most people who are old enough to vote, and aren't 99, have a current driver's license or a state ID or some equivalent because they need it for other stuff. And the older folks tend to vote Republican anyways, so some of these voter ID laws happen to hurt longstanding Republicans, like Reagan voting Republicans that are still around, more than anybody else. But check this out. Okay, so this was related. They talk about how the percentage, right? 13%. We saw this. This is a thing. You're supposed to voter ID. They're trying to stop people, blah, blah, blah. Okay, how effective are they, though? So we scroll down here. Remember what I tell you about paragraph 3? Okay, in this one, let's see, here it is. The Atlanta Journal obtained an updated list of voters without ID numbers, matched to their registrations from the Secretary of State's office through Georgia Open Records Act. Okay. You got that. Okay. The number of voters who didn't have an ID number on file decreased from 272,000 to 154,000 because the Georgia Secretary of State's office recently updated registration records to include more ID numbers from the Department of Driver Services. So motor voter kicked in, and a lot of people that weren't registered to vote are now automatically registered to vote because they chose to. They left them out in 2016 as one of the reasons why Republicans have had a hold on this. Part of the 202 law and previous laws in Georgia allow for this kind of thing. Now, way down here at the bottom of the thing, Senate Bill 202, here we go. This part. The 154,411 Georgians without ID numbers on file are disproportionately black voters, according to an AJC comparison to the state's voter registration and ID list. Black voters make up 58% of those who lack ID linked to their registrations, while accounting for 30% of the state's registered voters. So they're 18% higher within that subgroup to not have their IDs in order. Now, they are also going to be targeted by Democratic activists to make sure that that is remedied in upcoming elections. We have people on the ground, Democrats have people on the ground making sure you fix this. Republicans don't. They are not bothering with this outreach. And what you're going to see over the next 4 years is that number flip-flop. That the number of rural whites without a proper ID, percentage-wise, while this number drops to like 46,000 or some shit, is going to get smaller and smaller and smaller. Like the percentage is going to get smaller and smaller, and it's going to get higher amongst white people. This is okay. Many voters who don't have ID numbers on file also have never cast a ballot. Now, this is crucial. About 93,000 of the registered voters without an ID number have no record of ever voting in Georgia, according to state election data. $90,000 never vote. Now, why would that be? That would be because Democrats are doing get out the vote shit like crazy. And they are registering people to vote hand over fist. And a bunch of those people don't vote because they filled out the form or whatever at some point, but they weren't all that interested. But they've been asked 10 times, so they finally did it. That's it. How many of the 93,000 are 58% people of color, quote unquote, that didn't vote at all, or moved and therefore never voted, or filled out their form and then left? And this goes back to what I was talking to you guys about at the beginning of the show, this morning's conversation, is that people are telling you that statistically significant things, and they're not following it up with the material number. Sometimes they're doing it to manipulate you for negative reasons. And sometimes they think that unless they scare the living shit out of you, you're not going to do anything. And therefore the other side will win because you won't think the threat is big enough until you're already a boiled frog. So from this 154,000 people out of, by the way, there are 7.3 million, let's see, there were 1.3 million absentee ballots cast in last year's election. Of those, 64,000 approximately, 61,000 are people who may or may not have been able to vote absentee based on their application being rejected. Whether they filled out another one or not is not in here. But 61,000 people in that across the state had their absentee or had a didn't have an ID. 93,000 of those folks, of the other folks, did not vote at all. Of the 61,000, a bunch of those folks did vote because they had another form or they did it in person or what have you. They had other remedies that are in the law. But this is the part that stuck out to me in this. Now, remember what got us here. Remember what got us here. This title. So if you wonder why I am not panicked about these kind of things, and I think that focus and solving the actual problems in front of us, not the imaginary ones, or the concocted ones, is the solution, and why I think that the regular progress that Democratic get out the vote campaigns are going to make over time are going to solve for a lot of these issues, no matter how many roadblocks they try to throw up. If you wonder where I get that from, it's because I go 4 articles deep in this shit and recognize that that while they're trying to make a threat out of this stuff, most of the laws, most of SB 202 has nothing to do with voters of color. Has nothing to do with denying, voters of color the ability to vote, or even flip-flopping the electors in places like there's seemingly because they can switch the superintendent with there's all these subcategories of what they have to establish before they can do this, but swap them out and therefore put in new electors that will, turn Georgia red when it was clearly blue, those kind of things. That those things will be challenged in court and will never survive. They're just not going to. I'm telling you, in the next 6 to 8 months, there's going to be parts of these laws that are just going to be thrown out. I hope you're tight, Hal. I am. I think you meant right, but either one works. Stark Hal, that's my favorite typo of the day. I hope you're tight, Hal. Sorry. So let me show you what I mean. And then I know I'm hammering on this morning, but it's so crucial I don't want you guys to be, I honestly want you guys to feel motivated to work and, yeah, exactly.
Moon River.
I want you guys to feel motivated to make sure that people have the right to vote and that everybody who legally is allowed to vote can vote and all those kind of things without thinking that the problem is overwhelming and out of your control, because part of these things, it ends up being like a push poll, or what Trump, whined about, like suppression polls, that 117% one in Wisconsin, which nobody took seriously. He was like, this is the way, oh dear, darling, I don't even know why we should bother to vote if he's down by 17. Darling, the wind isn't blowing, we can't watch TV. Remember all that bullshit? So one of the things that they do is to make you think that that the challenge they're putting forward, their defensive line that they're putting forward, is just far too strong. It's impossible. You'll never beat it. Meanwhile, buried in the bill is a change of this one, which is really good and came about because these assholes know that some of their stuff that they're trying to do is racist and will be perceived as such. So they're laying ground cover. This part will not be repealed. This part will stay. And this part says, if at the previous general election, a precinct contained more than 2,000 voters, and if electors desiring to vote on the day of the election had to wait in line for more than 1 hour before checking in to vote, the superintendent shall either reduce the size of such precinct so that it shall contain not more than 2,000 electors in accordance with the procedures described by the chapter of this division, alteration and consolidation of precincts no later than 60 days before the next general election, or provide additional voting equipment or poll workers or both before the next general election. For administrating this code section, the chief manager of a precinct which contained more than 2,000 electors at the previous general election shall submit a report thereof to the superintendent of the reported time from entering the line to checking in to vote. So there's going to be somebody, according to this new law, somebody that goes down there and checks how long it takes in a general election for people to vote. And if it's more than an hour, by the next election, they have to provide more poll workers, more machines, or both. Or they have to reduce the size of the area. Let's say it's more because of population growth. You had more people turning 18 in this area, so they get to have a bigger precinct. And they get 60 days notice thereof, and people will be able to tell. And there's going to be apps that Democrats will have to remind everybody where their precinct is. You'll be able to look it up like that. They are so fighting yesterday's battle on so many of these things. So such wait times shall be measured no fewer than 3 different times throughout the day, in the morning, midday, and prior to the close of polls. So at that crush at the end of the day, like they can't measure it in the morning when it's light and go, yeah, you can fucking get in, it's not a problem. And then later on in the day when people get off work, the lines get longer and people have to give up. They have to measure it 3 times during the day. And if it's more than an hour wait, they have to provide more machines and more poll workers, or they have to shrink the size of the precinct and either add another precinct or grow the smaller one and move people over so you guys go vote over this place so that you have more places. I'm sorry. That's a great thing. And that is not going anywhere. That's stick to your ribs law right now. Will there be an next election? Yeah, there will be. And if they make people wait in 2022 longer than an hour in any precinct in Georgia, they will be provided with more machines equal to the 2,000 people who are trying to vote that day, or more or less, depending on whether or not they bifurcate one of these places. They got 2,000. Let's say they have 2,500 people trying to vote in a particular precinct, and 2,000 in the next one over. They create a sub precinct and another location that can handle up to 2,000 voters, and so they'll bifurcate or trifurcate those three areas into 1,200 apiece. More than likely, based on how close it is to your house. It will be supplied for the next election if it's more than an hour. Before, they had 3, 5, and 7 hour lines. They were measuring in the morning and not providing anything. So it got worse and worse in high population districts and lighter in others. Now in 2022, almost nothing will fit this measurement. They're counting on that. But in 2024, it abso-fucking-lutely will. And if they try to choke point these places and deny people voting machines in these areas, they all but guarantee an easier precinct experience for all the voters in those areas in the presidential election the next time around. Could the Republicans use this for gerrymandering? No, the gerrymandering is done through census. Let's see. Oh, and then this was the other one. This is related to an article I looked at earlier, and this will be the last one where I know I'm harping on this, but you guys got to understand that my optimism and my desire to fight the good fight and that progress is being made, because I think part of what happens is people get demoralized and then they give up. They're like, God damn it, these laws and blah, blah, blah. The way people talk about it in these broad strokes makes it sound like you can't do anything about it and you've already lost. And then people tend to give up. And I'm not going to let that happen. And a lot of a lot of these work in reverse. A lot of these laws are going to affect, like I said, rural whites in Georgia far worse than black people in cities, which was the target initially. Because the get out the vote campaign in cities, especially in places in urban centers like Atlanta, is way easier than driving out in the fucking sticks and making sure some hillbilly has a brand new state ID. And Republicans are going to find this out the hard way, and they're going to start rescinding some of this shit because they lose. I mean, again, people get out over their skis all the fucking time, and they think they come up with a solution that's going to guarantee their win, and then they end up shooting themselves in the foot. And this is exactly what's happening to rural whites in a lot of these redneck states. That's honest to God. Setting these rules in place in Kentucky, for example, would not affect black people in Louisville and Lexington per se. They're going to fuck up Appalachia, though. They're going to screw everybody who's trying to vote in Pikesville. So that's the part. Watch for that blowback. Because again, activists of all sorts always get out over their skis. They're high on their own supply. They think it's all going to work their way. They can't imagine their solution not working. And a shit ton of this stuff that they put in these laws is about convincing Trump voters to go back to voting. It's all just fart air. It means nothing. We fixed all the stuff from 2020, so it's okay to vote. That they're talking to their own voters with these laws. There's nothing to do. Look, believe me, Democrats are aware of what the legal needs of people of color in Georgia are going to be, and they're going to be busting their ass to make sure that they all meet those requirements. And they're going to, even if they can't hand out water to line people, you don't think a block away they're going to be, hey, we're not telling you who to vote for, but here, have a bottle of water because it's a long line. They're trying to fuck you this year. Next year, they won't be able to because the law means that they get more than an hour is against the law. So this is the part that I know I keep saying this is my Midwestern goodbye on all these things. This was part of the article that I was reading before. In all, remember that 4% that we saw, this part right here, the 4% of absentee ballots, that was 400%, right? 400%. Guys, it's up 400%. Jesus God, it's up 400% of a, smaller absolute number, and it's the same number of people who try to vote by mail every time, and same people have squiggly signatures and whatever. Anyways, way more people voted by mail last time, and so therefore the people who functionally were able to vote by mail and had all their ducks in a row was way higher, and so the percentage of rejections is way lower. Never mind that. 400%. In all, election officials rejected 4% of absentee ballot requests for this year's municipal elections on November 2nd, according to public voting records analyzed by the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. There were 1,362 rejected absentee ballot applications out of 35,312 submitted. 1,352. How many of you believe that what the fuck? Let's see. Hold on real quick. How many of you believe? Let's see. Let's look up the population of Georgia. What is it about? Yeah, here you go. 10,000 people. Something like 7,000 registered voters. Most voted in person in the last election. 1.3 million voted in 2020 absentee. Because they specifically call mail-in voting absentee, whereas Wisconsin, everything that isn't on election day, if you early vote, that's absentee voting. It's all mail-in voting / absentee. They just use the same fucking word for everything. There's 10,000 people in Georgia. 10 million. There's 7 million registered voters approximately. Of those, 1,362 absentee ballot applications out of 35,000 were rejected this year. Now, how many people think that there were 35,000 absentee ballots submitted in 2020? See what I'm getting at? You see what I'm saying? You are being herded. And in many ways, some of the people who are trying to scare the crap out of you mean well. They don't think that you will worry enough, so they try to get you to worry too much. It's like, yes, 4% equals 400% when 1% was the previous year. That's exactly right, Kaylee. I'm just going to call you Clink from now on. Is that okay? But I won't call you Colonel. You get me? And a lot of, CDC does this, NIH does this, and they mean well. They absolutely give you the worst case scenario, because if they give you the moderate one, you won't fucking pay attention and you might get killed. So they play up the worst numbers to motivate you, because statistically they know most people will default to system 2 thinking, be lazy about it, and not go the extra mile. So a lot of the voters' rights groups and civil rights groups and the like are going to try and scare the living shit out of you, not because they're trying to lie to you specifically, but because unless they show you the worst case scenario, you're not going to do anything. That's what they think. Dad, you say figures lie and liars figure. Yeah. So none of my audience, I don't think, needs to be manipulated like this. And I think as we increasingly, I get CDC doing it, they deal with some very bad diseases. Yes, I agree. But it's a system that has spread across a lot of different issues. And in the realm of like civil rights and in the realm of voting rights, you have some people with a lot of personal attention on the issue who can't see that solutions are happening all around them because they can't afford to in their own mind, because what they're dealing with is so life and death. So YouTube might be having an issue. Oh, good. K-Link, great. Okay. Well, then that's what I'll keep doing. So, and again, that's an increase from less than 1% of absentee ballot applications rejected in last year's general election. Now, if you'll notice, when they say 4%, they show you what 4% is. 1,362 out of 35,312. When they say that's an increase from less than 1% of absentee ballot applications rejected in last year's election, they do not tell you the base number. Do you see? Do you see? They don't. And it's crucial that you know that, because you're only the best you when you can breathe deep and deal with a real challenge that's in front of you, not the challenge you're being fed. Because what you will do is come up with the wrong solution to the problem that's in front of you. You will assume that this is the cause, therefore we must look for a solution that deals with this cause. And if that's not the cause, then you are chasing your tail.